this is just showing you how thyroid hormone acts in general, where it's often bound to the thyroid binding globulin in a complex in circulation. It's the free hormone that's most important for activating the target cells, which are most of the cells in the body. And you have this key step of removing one iodine to form T3. Before this can bind to a receptor, the receptor in thyroid hormone, or thyroid hormone's case, is often already associated with the DNA, as opposed to a lot of the steroid receptors, where they are associated either in the often in the cytoplasm with chaperone proteins, also called heat shock proteins, that have to dissociate before the hormone forms a dimer and comes into the cell nucleus and binds to a particular site on the DNA. The receptor in the case of thyroid hormone also acts using homodimers. Remember, most of the nuclear receptors form dimers in order to bind to the DNA sites and bend the DNA or alter the DNA structure so that you get a change in gene readout. The thing about thyroid hormone, as opposed to a lot of the steroid hormones, is that the receptor for thyroid hormone often forms functional heterodimers with other nuclear receptors. And you'll get a lot of instances, a lot of sites where thyroid hormone receptor is associated with, say, vitamin D receptor or with retinoic acid receptor. So you get a heterocomplex forming on the DNA and helping to alter gene readout, transcription, and ultimately translation. Okay. So the thyroid receptor, often on the DNA, even in the absence of the hormone has to get to the nucleus and bind, and it binds in the form of T3. And it can be, and often is, inhibitory or stimulatory, depending on which gene you're looking at. That's true of a lot of the others, but for instance, estradiol is often stimulatory. Glucocorticoid receptor is often stimulatory as opposed to inhibitory. Go back a little bit more.
So that just means that the receptor hangs out on the DNA and doesn't do anything until it binds to the hormone?
Well, if it's doing something, it seems to be basal level. Okay. So regulating basal level. Remember that one of those receptors is apparently doesn't require the binding of the hormone, and the thought is that that's a pseudogene. It may in fact be one that's expressed and is doing something other than what we think it is. Okay. Now, part of the reason why I wanted to go back to these is there are a few ideas in here that that are not expressed perhaps as well or expressed differently in that slide, that PowerPoint slide presentation. In the case of the thyroid anatomy, this picture may do a better job of showing you the embedded parathyroid gland, usually a couple of them on either side in primates. And that's where PTH is coming from. You're going to hear about that in about a week and a half. Parafollicular cells, or C cells, the ones that make calcitonin, also involved in calcium metabolism, embedded kind of sporadically in the area of in the thyroid stroma or background tissue outside of these follicles. And then you've got the colloidal space and these epithelial cells that surround the colloidal space and are found within the basal lamina of the thyroid follicles. The one thing I also wanted to point out here, I've shown in this diagram, but not on that other depiction, is that these cells also are sealed together one to another with tight junctions. And with the basal lamina, they seal the luminal space from other serum proteins. But here again, you've got a compartment within the body where the body is preventing free distribution of serum contents by sealing a compartment off via tight junction and via a basal lamina of connective tissue that's semi-permeable. Okay, you've seen this picture already, and the big thing about the epithelial cells in the thyroid is they both make the precursor of the active hormone in the form of this big protein with modified residues that are embedded in it. This is what gets iodinated when you've got sufficient iodine and sufficient energy available to make the hormone. This is what gets screwed up in cases where you have insufficient iodine in the diet, or where you have a intake of a compound like a goitrogen that blocks the formation of this activated iodine or sops up the iodine as another chemical product that has nothing to do with thyroid function. And it's also, so you've got this arm of synthesis, but you've also got this arm of breakdown, which is what actually gives you the active hormone back into circulation. And it's simply speeded up by the presence of TSH. Or in the case of Graves' disease, this long-acting thyroid stimulator protein that binds to the receptor and activates this cascade, but is not under feedback control from thyroid hormone. Yeah, that's what I talked about before. All right. So, the other thing I could talk about in terms of thyroid hormone, in terms of its actions, somebody's been cleaning house here. T3 acting via the T3 receptor is often going to produce a variety of proteins, one of which is called an uncoupling factor. There's the sodium, potassium, ATPase in membrane. Throwing your money around. Okay. There's the electron transport system proteins. This decreases efficiency of use of glucose and oxygen to form ATP. This one exchanges potassium for sodium using ATP. Actually, it's the ATP plus PI. Okay. And this one, of course, increases number of electron transport systems in mitochondria. Anything that seems to link those three things together? Anything. What does the electron transport system do? Come on, you guys, you learned it in basic biology. What does the electron transport system do? What do the mitochondria do? Okay, they synthesize ATP using glucose and other reducing equivalents. And what else? Yeah, what's the other substrate that they have to have in order to function?
Electron carriers.
Yeah, like what? Oxygen. Those are reducing equivalents. Okay. Okay. So you've got cyclic AMP synthesis. This is shipping potassium, sodium out and allowing potassium to come into the cell, right? And it's doing what to the ATP content of the cell? It's decreasing it. Why?
Because it's using up the ATP to
Okay, because it uses ATP to drive this exchange. So this is decreased cyclic AMP. What about up here? We said that the mitochondria, the electron transport system, makes ATP using reducing equivalents and glucose plus oxygen to form that ATP. What if I make the coupling less efficient? Okay. And I give it the same amount of oxygen and glucose or glucose equivalents. I just make it less efficient. How much ATP do I get out? Do I get the same amount out?
No.
How much do I get out? No, behind you.
Yeah, I don't know. Depends on how much you do. It depends on.
If you put in the same amount we did before,
Yeah.
but we said it was less efficient, how much ATP do we get out? You will get some. You will get less, okay? You make it less efficient, it makes less on the basis of the amount of glucose, oxygen you put in.
Does it affect the rate or just the efficiency?
I believe it's the efficiency, okay? The uncoupling protein seems to decrease the efficiency of electron transport down the system. Now, what is the byproduct of synthesis of ATP? Does anybody know? Pardon? CO2 is burning of glucose. Okay. Okay, water. What else? One other thing. Okay, I can still run the system if I totally turn off the electron transport system. What do I get if I don't allow ATP to be made? No, don't. I'm not giving you something that's real deep into biochemistry. What's the byproduct of the synthesis of ATP from its substrates? No. Okay. Do you get all the energy back that you started with? If you took the molecules of oxygen and glucose and you figured out how much energy they contain, do I get that much energy back as ATP? No, you get some as heat. Now, what's thyroid hormone help regulate? Body temperature. Okay? One of the ways it helps regulate body temperature is the production of this, and this.
That energy is lost as heat.
Okay, so if I'm doing a lot of breakdown of ATP to do this, what do I get as a byproduct that I haven't shown? Okay, any chemical, basics, any chemical reaction that behaves by the second law of thermodynamics has to generate what in addition to the products? Heat. Okay? Heat. If this isn't as efficient, then you increase heat generation. If you've made more of these and they're operating in efficiency, what are you generating more of besides ATP? Heat. It's all about heat.
Wait, but if you have less ATP, then wouldn't you have less residual heat?
The ATP can be used further on to generate more heat by breaking off the N-terminal or the third phosphate group, okay, which contains the most energy. Okay. But if you're making more ATP from electron transport,
But aren't you making less in that one if they?
you're making it less efficiently with the uncoupling protein present.
Yeah.
Okay? So this gives you more electron transport, more overall ATP production. But if you're doing it less efficiently because this is present, you're increasing the amount of heat generated. This is what happens in brown fat in young offspring particularly. But it can also happen to a lesser degree in adult animals. You want proof? Take a rat and put it in the refrigerator for a period of time. Okay? They will accommodate. And what they do in part to accommodate is the thyroid system is activated. Any animal living in prolonged cold situations will have a more active thyroid and be generating more of this stuff, more of this stuff, and more of this stuff. And it's because they need to produce heat. Okay. If you were to look at, okay, that's euthermic animal, or those are endothermic animals. What are endotherms?
They regulate their own heat.
Okay. Endotherms Does anybody know what a kilotherm is? How about a poikilotherm? You guys ran across this in biology. Does anybody have any guesses? Well, we heard the endotherm. Equals maintains own body temperature. Anybody have a guess what that is? Poikilotherm.
Utilizing the environment to regulate body temperature.
We also call those animals cold-blooded. So, exotherms. You can have animals that also have features of both. Anybody ever seen a eastern marmot, also called a groundhog? Oh, they're cute. They're very destructive in your garden. Okay, they're also called whistle pigs, among other things. They and a variety of other animals do something in the wintertime that's a little different from what we do. What do? They hibernate. You've got a lot of there are a number of animals that do hibernation. Bears will hibernate. The groundhogs I mentioned. A lot of squirrels will hibernate. When they hibernate, many of these species have body temperatures that will drop to little bit above freezing. Okay. And there are even animals that are cold-blooded that will freeze solid. Okay. There are some fish that will do that as well. Okay. Those animals, the ones that freeze solid, have modifications of their blood and blood proteins, blood chemistry and blood protein, that allow them to thaw out without being damaged. But the interesting thing about the animals that hibernate is that they do it seasonally, and they come out of it with no problem. They don't have to have an infusion of new blood in order for them to resume activities in the spring, usually in the springtime. What do you think plays a role there? You might think so, okay? And they're probably switching from a euthermic situation where everything here is in balance to a situation where they're producing only limited quantities of these proteins so that the body temperature can drop. There's also going to have to be, where else would have to be a modification have to occur for that system to function properly? Physiologically and anatomically, where would there have to be a change for that system to work properly? Sorry, Em, I'm going to pass you.
Circulation?
Not just circulation. Circulation is often Circulation is affected, but it's often as a result of a decrease in heart rate.
Yeah, but if you have no circulation, if your blood is frozen solid, then how can you?
No. Your blood isn't frozen solid. These animals don't freeze solid, except for the ones that have modified proteins in their blood. Those are often either invertebrates or fish. What else has to change?
The body fat?
Body fat may change. You're right. It's one other system. Let's give you another system that's also going in and out. Okay. In a lot of these animals that hibernate, in others that do something called estivation, and in others, like ruminants, are seasonal breeders. Okay. When we talked about reproduction, we focused a lot on primates and humans. Okay. Humans are not normally seasonal breeders. Okay. They are ready to go anytime. But there's no in and out in terms of natural gross changes in hormone levels, except when? When do you get big changes in the reproductive system in primates or most animals? Pardon?
Pregnancy or reproduction?
Pregnancy, puberty, where else? Menopause, okay? That's where you'll see the big changes occurring. So, in many of these animals that are seasonal breeders, however, it's almost as if they went in and out of puberty repeatedly, every year, okay? So, they've gotten to adult levels at some point. They get to the end of the breeding season, and their LH, RH pulse rates and amplitudes go down. And they remain down until there is a seasonal trigger, usually it's daylight length, that stimulates the hypothalamus to kick in again and to elevate those levels of hormones. Now, that happens, and it's well documented in many, many species for seasonal breeding. What do you think is happening to the thyroid axis for those that are hibernators?
It's decreasing. You want to decrease metabolism?
Okay, but what would be decreasing?
Thyroxine production.
Okay, thyroxine production probably is decreasing, but what's controlling thyroid production? TSH, TRH, pardon? Not CRH, no. Okay, but you've got controllers in the hypothalamus. So it's the hypothalamus and the pituitary function that has to be shifted in coordination with external cues, daylight length, temperature change, something that causes these animals to drive or go toward hibernation. And when they do, you're going to see a modification of thyroid activity, and depending on whether or not they're also seasonal breeders, you'll probably see a shift in their breeding capacity as well. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
So this is a totally silly question, but
No question that's asked is silly.
this one is. So when, like, say like I think it's black bears, they hibernate, right?
Right.
They enter like a sleep mode, as people call it.
Yep.
How do they, like, even if there's danger around, like, they won't wake up?
Mhm.
Like, no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, there's
So how is their system, like, shut off? Is what I mean.
a lot of this work has actually been done by a pair of brothers out in
Like, how does
out in
nervous
Colorado.
system stay off for that long? Is
Okay.
that-
A couple of guys who did some of the pioneer work were the Craig brothers out in, I think it's Colorado and in Wyoming. and they studied primarily grizzly bears. Okay, and they would to study them, they crawled into the dens of animals that had gotten into hibernate. Now, you want to make sure that a grizzly bear is asleep if you're going to come in and take blood samples and check their pulse and do things like that. So what you're seeing is a turn down in activities, all sorts of bodily activities. Many animals that undergo the kind of torpor that you see with hibernation, you can go in and you can dig up a prairie dog, or you can dig up a groundhog and lift them out of the den and examine them, study them, take samples, and they won't wake up if they're really in full hibernation.
So is it like a coma?
It is almost like a coma, yes.
Do they still their blood work so they can clot if you take a sample? They're not going to bleed to death from a pinch?
You know, I haven't looked at that carefully. I do know who
I think
did.
their blood, their circulation is low. 'Cause
Their
they want
circulation
heart
is
rate
low.
to be really
Yeah.
low.
Yeah,
So it must-
and somebody's probably done the blood chemistry. They may have changes in platelet levels and all that sort of stuff as well, and blood factors that are involved in clotting. But yeah, so they're, you know, part of the seasonal breeding and hibernation. It's a fascinating area because there's another phenomenon that's also associated with it. You see it in bears. You see it most pronounced in bats, and that is that a lot of these species will mate prior to entering hibernation. And the females will often have fertilized eggs and early stage embryos that do not implant until well into hibernation. They are in a state of suspended animation. And nobody yet understands exactly what's going on as to how that can be maintained. It's as if somebody turned on the brakes and said, okay, you get to 4-cell stage, or you get to 16, or your fertilized egg, and you're going to wait in line until things are ready down the way. You see, yeah.
And they also must be in an environment with no predators, I'm assuming, when they hibernate. Because
Well, they're trying to get into a safe location so they can get through the winter.
that's a long time to not
Yeah.
get eaten.
True, but it's much less of a problem if you weigh 1,500 pounds
Very true.
and you have no real
Predators.
predators. I mean, black bears, the only real predator for a black bear is a grizzly bear, and the overlap in the ranges is limited at this point. It used to be much more prominent, but that's about it. Okay, let's see. I really wanted to talk a bit more about thyroid today because we're essentially caught up on the syllabus, and diving into the pancreatic system as a whole ball of wax that I'd prefer not to have to include on your next exam.
Thank you.
Sorry, just going back to what you had on the board for exotherm, would you just
Sure.
define that as animals that hibernate?
No, these are animals that where the environment controls the body temperature.
Okay.
Okay. Not all of those are going to be hibernators. Okay. Anybody here have relatives with thyroid problems? Okay. Male or female? Male or female? Male or female? Pardon? Female? There were several others. Female? Female? I haven't. Pardon? Okay, well, I'm not asking that. Okay. Female? Okay. Anything missing in that little poll? Nothing's missing? No- Nothing missing, okay. I said that diseases of the thyroid were about 8 times as common in females as there were in males. We still don't know why. Okay. The one of the people who know, who have themselves or other folks who have the thyroid problem, is it hyperthyroidism? How many are hyperthyroidism? Overproduction of thyroid, overactivity of the thyroid gland. Hypothyroidism. You don't know? Okay. So of those who, how many you don't know whether it's hypo or hyper, just that it's thyroid? One. Okay. Now, do you know if they're taking medication? Are they taking thyroid hormone as medication? Levothyroxine. What is levothyroxine?
Probably for hypo.
What is levothyroxine?
I guess.
It's thyroxine, okay? It's thyroid hormone, okay? Those are in back there. Do you know if it's, are they taking levothyroxine or thyroxine? Okay. Removal of the thyroid? Yeah. So she's going to be taking levothyroxine, their thyroid hormone. So it sounds like an awful lot of them are hypothyroid. You're taking replacement thyroid hormone to maintain normalcy. Yes?
Isn't like Hashimoto's disease more common in men though? Like hyperthyroidism is more common in men?
No. If you look at the numbers, it's about 8-fold for both hyper and hypo. And like I say, we still don't know why. Okay.
Hypo is overall more common?
Pardon?
The hypo is overall more common?
Well, I'm seeing hypo as being quite common. It's reasonable because thyroid problems include forms of thyroid cancer, which often involve ablation of at least part of the thyroid gland, which frequently means you're going to be hypothyroid. All right, folks. Have a great Thanksgiving if you're celebrating Thanksgiving. And spend a little bit of time over the weekend studying for the exam, which occurs when? Following Friday, okay? And I'll give you a note next week